The extraction. She was standing in the elevator as the green gas began to pour through the ventilation, and she understood with absolute clarity that her father had turned his own death into a weapon. The countdown timer had reached 0. Julian was dead. Dr. Thorne was dying behind a sealed vault door, and Elena Vance held a key that no longer mattered. 13 hours earlier, the morning had begun like any other. The blue ceramic vase sat on the high shelf of the kitchen island, positioned between a row of leather-bound design books and a small bronze sculpture of a bird in flight. Elena had owned it for 3 years. It had never seemed to contain anything but itself, a perfect decorative object in a perfectly curated life with Julian. She reached for it on a Tuesday morning at 7:30, yellow microfiber cloth in hand, moving through the domestic rituals that filled her days. The vase tilted as her fingers found its rim. Something heavy shifted inside, not the settling of dust. The distinct thud of plastic against ceramic, a sound that didn't belong in a vase. She turned it upside down above the white marble island. A small object fell into the morning light, landing next to a half-eaten piece of toast that had gone cold an hour ago. A matte black Nokia 105 flip phone. Pristine. No scratches. No protective case. Just a burner phone. The kind that appeared in films about criminals and disappeared just as quickly. Elena picked it up with the tips of her fingers, as though it might burn her. She pressed the center button. The screen illuminated with the glow of a device that had been powered but never truly used. No wallpaper, no customizations, just signal bars and battery at 80%. One unread message icon, blinking in the upper corner like a small red eye. She opened the message folder. A single text from unavailable. Package secured. Drop off at midnight. The date was yesterday. What is this? She hadn't heard Julian enter the kitchen. He stood in the doorway wearing his gray silk robe, the one he'd had tailored in Milan last spring. His face was still soft with sleep, his hair uncombed, but his eyes had sharpened the moment he saw the phone in her hand. The transformation was instantaneous. From the man she'd shared a bed with to something else entirely. Something with a different weight and a different purpose. Julian, what is this? Her voice had begun to shake. He moved toward her with the deliberation of someone approaching a wild animal. Not fast, measured. Each step calculated to project absolute control. His hand reached out, palm open, as though he was teaching her to drop something. "Put that down, Elena," he said, his voice dropping into a register she'd never heard before. "You're overreacting to things you don't understand." The tone was the thing that saved her, not the words. The tone, because she recognized it from 1,000 subtle moments over the past 3 years. The careful patience he used when she asked questions he didn't want to answer. The gentle insistence that she was mistaken about things she'd clearly seen. The voice of someone who had decided her perceptions were faulty and hers alone to bear. She didn't put the phone down. Instead, Elena grabbed her leather handbag from the counter and bolted for the front door. Her fingers found the deadbolt and slid it back with a loud metallic clack that seemed to echo through the entire apartment. She pulled the heavy door open into the dim light of the hallway. Behind her, Julian moved faster than she'd seen him move before. His hand slammed against the door frame to stop it, but he was a half-second too slow. Elena was already through, already in the concrete stairwell, her heels clicking rapidly against the steps as she descended. "Elena!" His voice echoed down after her. "Stop! Don't make this worse." But worse was relative, and Elena was running. She took the first flight at speed, her hand sliding along the metal railing to control her descent. The Nokia phone was still gripped in her right hand, a weight that seemed to pull her downward with gravitational force. She could hear Julian behind her, his footsteps heavier than hers, driven by a different kind of urgency. Halfway down the second flight, something grabbed her handbag strap. Julian had vaulted over the railing from the landing above, reaching down to catch the leather strap and yank upward with full force. The bag's weight shifted. Elena's balance went sideways. Her shoulders slammed into the brick wall with a sound like a gunshot. Pain bloomed across her collarbone. She gasped, the sound involuntary and raw. But she didn't stop moving. She pivoted, trying to wrench free of the bag, but Julian's grip was absolute. He descended 3 steps rapidly, using his body weight to pin her against the wall. His free hand wrapped around her wrist, the one holding the phone, and squeezed until her fingers went numb. The Nokia fell from her grip, hitting the concrete with a plastic thud. Mine. His voice was at her ear now, intimate and venomous. Everything you have is mine, because I allow it. Do you understand? Everything. Elena's body responded before her mind could catch up. She drove her knee upward into his groin with all the force she could generate. Julian's grip loosened. He let out a choked grunt that was almost a whimper, and his hands flew to his abdomen as he doubled over. Elena didn't wait for him to recover. She scooped up the phone and sprinted down the remaining stairs, her footsteps thundering against the concrete. The heavy fire door at the bottom of the stairwell was weighted and slow to open, but she hit it with her shoulder and burst through into the lobby light. Behind her, the door swung closed with a boom that seemed to seal away the world she'd just been living in. She didn't stop at the lobby. She pushed through the main entrance into the street, where the morning was overcast and gray. And she stood there breathing like she'd run a marathon, knowing that everything had changed in the space of 13 minutes. The first taxi that passed, she hailed. She gave the driver an address that wasn't home and wasn't anywhere Julian would think to look. Dr. Eris Thorne's office. Private practice. 3rd floor of a building in a quiet neighborhood, where people dealt with their problems in small, climate-controlled rooms. Elena had been seeing Thorne for 6 months. 3 years into her relationship with Julian, she'd started to feel like the edges of herself were dissolving. Small moments where she questioned her own memories, her own instincts, her own sanity. Julian would say she'd said something, and she was certain she hadn't. Julian would deny a conversation that had clearly happened. Julian would look at her with a kind of patient disappointment when she brought up his inconsistencies, as if she were a child who couldn't quite grasp basic arithmetic. Dr. Thorne's office was warm and deliberately calming. Soft gray walls, a tufted leather armchair where Thorne sat with a cup of green tea, a gray velvet sofa where Elena now sat, her sleeve torn at the shoulder, her skin blooming with bruises. The rain had started. It drummed against the window in steady rhythm, a percussion section to the silence between them. Thorne set down her tea on a side table and didn't fill the space with questions Elena wasn't ready to answer. "You're safe here, Elena. Tell me about the phone." Elena placed the Nokia on the glass coffee table. Next to it, she placed something else, a small laminated card she'd found tucked into the battery compartment during the taxi ride. The card was worn at the edges, as though it had been handled many times. The logo was simple: professional, Aethelgard security. "He didn't just find me," Elena said, and the words felt strange in her mouth, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. "He was the one who protected my father during the fallout. He was the lead investigator." It wasn't until she said it aloud that she understood what she was saying. The pieces that had never quite fit together suddenly formed a shape that was too large and too terrible to ignore. Thorne leaned forward. Her expression shifted from empathy into something sharper, something clinical and intense. She picked up the laminated card and turned it over in her hands, her thumb tracing the logo. Elena, Aethelgard wasn't a security firm. They were a liquidation squad. If Julian was there, he wasn't protecting your father. He was dismantling his life to see what was left to take. The words landed like a second impact. Elena pulled out the only photograph she had of her father from her pocket. A faded 4:6 image from 10 years ago. Family trip to the coast, her father smiling. Behind him, in the background, a young man stood by a black sedan. The same face. Younger, cleaner, but unmistakably Julian. And on his wrist, visible only if you looked closely at the grain of the old photograph, a small tattoo. A serpent eating its own tail. The Ouroboros. A symbol of cycles, of things that consume themselves. He told me he met me by chance at the gallery, Elena whispered. He's been following me for a decade. Thorne handed the photo back and pointed to the tattoo with the tip of her finger. This isn't a toxic relationship, Elena. This is a long-term extraction, and you still have something he wants. The office fell quiet, except for the rain. Elena could feel the weight of that statement settling onto her shoulders. She wasn't a girlfriend who'd made a mistake. She wasn't a victim of a bad relationship. Below the map, a text message appeared in stark white letters. I see you. Thorne stood without a word. She grabbed Elena by the elbow and pulled her toward a side door that opened into a back hallway. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere in the main corridor outside. Backstairs, now, Thorne commanded. The footsteps grew louder. Shadows moved under the doors. Thorne pulled Elena through the side entrance just as the main office door was kicked open with a sound like thunder. A man in a high-visibility technician's vest rushed in, carrying a heavy metal telescopic baton. The vest was neon yellow, designed to make him visible. His face was designed to be forgettable. His purpose was immediately clear. As he spotted them in the side doorway, his hand moved to extend the baton. The metal segments clicked open with a sound like a blade being drawn. He began to run. Thorne didn't hesitate. She grabbed the ceramic tea tray from the side table, the one that held her cup and the teapot and the small porcelain cup she'd been drinking from, and swung it like a weapon. The tray connected with the man's forehead with a sound that was simultaneously fragile and devastating. The ceramic shattered. Hot tea splashed across his face. Steam rose from his skin. He screamed, a raw animal sound of pain, and his hands flew to his face to wipe away the liquid. Elena kicked out her leg, sweeping low and precise. The man's legs went out from under him. He hit the floor hard, the wind knocked from his lungs, his body going rigid with the impact. Thorne slammed the side door shut behind them and turned the thumb-turn lock. Through the frosted glass, they could see the man struggling to his feet, his face lobster red from the tea. The back stairs descended into dimness. They took them two at a time, Elena's heels echoing off concrete. Behind them, something heavy hit the door they'd just locked. Wood splintered, but the door held. By the time they reached the ground level, Elena's heart was beating so hard she could barely think. The world had tilted. Everything she'd believed about her reality had been exposed as tissue-thin and fragile. Thorne hailed a taxi with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before, which, Elena realized with a new spike of fear, she probably had. They drove to a storage facility on the edge of the city, the kind of place where people kept things they didn't want near their homes. Boxes they couldn't throw away, secrets in compartments. Thorne paid cash for the security guard's discretion. They were given Unit 447 on the 4th level. It was a small, windowless space. Cardboard boxes stacked on top of each other. A single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The kind of place where a person could hide for a few hours before the next disaster found them. Elena sat on the stack of boxes and began to examine her handbag. She dug through the lining with her fingers, searching for something she hadn't known she was looking for until she found it. A small, sharp lump near the bottom seam, something her fingers recognized as wrong. She pulled out a penknife and slit the lining carefully. From inside the silk pocket, she withdrew a heavy brass key. The head of the key was circular and elaborately engraved with the numbers 77B. It was old, precious, the kind of key that belonged to something real. "My father's rainy day deposit," Elena said, the words barely a whisper. "Julian isn't trying to hurt me. He's trying to find where I'm going." Thorne examined the key, turning it over in her hands. Her expression changed as she looked at the back of the key head. There, barely visible without the right angle of light, was a small etched microchip. Silicon. Technology. The key was a dual authentication device. "This isn't just a key," Thorne said, her voice steady and clinical. "It's a dual auth token. You need the key and the person. The vault won't open without your biometrics." Elena's laptop was in her handbag. She opened it in the storage unit's dim light, the screen glowing like a small portal into the external world. They sat in silence, waiting for something to happen. The storage facility hummed with the white noise of climate control. At 10:45, Elena's email chimed. An anonymous sender. Subject line, "The truth about Thorne." Her thumb hovered over the trackpad for a long moment. She knew, on some level, that opening this email would change something. That knowledge, once acquired, couldn't be unacquired. She clicked. The email contained a scanned document. It was a contract, a consulting agreement. Eris Thorne, consultant for Aethelgard Security, 2014-2016. And attached to the contract was a photograph. It showed Thorne and Julian together at a gala, both of them dressed in formal wear, both of them smiling at the camera like old colleagues who just discovered they'd be working together. Elena looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at the screen. The storage unit felt suddenly very small. "You were with him," Elena said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "This whole day, you've been leading me to the key." For a moment, Thorne didn't respond. She simply looked at Elena with an expression that was neither confirmation nor denial. It was something worse. It was recognition. The kind of look that acknowledged that Elena had finally understood the shape of the trap she was in. Elena threw the laptop at Thorne's head. Thorne ducked, and the laptop smashed against the corrugated metal wall of the storage unit, sparks erupting from the broken circuit board. Elena lunged for the door, her hand finding the metal handle, pulling it upward with all her strength. But Thorne was faster than she looked. Or maybe Elena was slower than she needed to be. Thorne's fingers found Elena's hair from behind and yanked backward with brutal force. Elena screamed, a sound that echoed in the confined space. Her fingers clawed at the metal door frame, desperate for purchase, but Thorne was already pulling her back into the center of the unit. Thorne slammed Elena's face against the corrugated metal wall. The impact was sharp and clear. Pain bloomed across Elena's forehead. She tasted blood, warm and metallic. "I was trying to make this easy for you, Elena," Thorne said, her voice devoid of any emotion whatsoever. "Compliance is much less painful than resistance. You should have just given me the key when we first met." Elena's vision blurred at the edges. She could feel blood running down her temple, but her body was still responding to some primitive instinct to survive. She drove her elbow backward into Thorne's abdomen. Thorne grunted, but her grip didn't loosen. Elena bit down on Thorne's forearm. Not gently, not a warning bite. A bite designed to draw blood and inflict pain. Thorn flinched, her fingers loosening just enough. Elena dropped to the floor and crawled under the partially open door of the adjacent storage unit, Unit 412, squirming through the gap with desperation. She was halfway inside when the gunshots came. 2 suppressed rounds. The sound was like a cough, almost gentle, except for the fact that the metal door of the unit was being punched through by bullets. Small holes appeared in the corrugated steel, and Elena knew with absolute certainty that if she'd been standing in the wrong place, those holes would have been punched through her body instead. Julian stood at the end of the long, fluorescent-lit corridor. A suppressed handgun hung at his side, still smoking slightly. His face was calm. Satisfied, he began to walk toward them with slow, measured steps. And with each step, Elena understood that the rules of the game had changed again. The next 3 hours were a series of degradations that Elena would later struggle to remember in any sequential order. Julian had moved her, restrained her, done things that left her body aching and her mind temporarily fractured. He'd been efficient and clinical and utterly devoid of any emotion except satisfaction. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she was strapped into a wheelchair. The wheelchair descended into a facility she hadn't known existed. Sublevel 4. A white-tiled vault foyer with harsh LED lighting and a massive circular steel door that looked like something from a Cold War bunker. The door was 3 feet thick. The locking mechanism was mechanical and digital and biometric. Julian positioned the wheelchair in front of a retinal scanner. He tilted Elena's head back by her hair, forcing her to look at the red laser light that swept across her iris. Her eye felt exposed and vulnerable. Naked. "Look at the light, Elena," Julian said, mocking. "One last service to the family name." Elena tried to shut her eyes, but Julian used his thumb and forefinger to pry her eyelid open. The machine chirped, a sound so mundane and ordinary that it seemed impossible that it was authenticating her identity to unlock a vault worth potentially millions of dollars. Identity confirmed. Elena Vance. Accessing repository 77B. Julian inserted the brass key into the mechanical slot below the screen. He turned it with a soft click. The heavy gears behind the door began to groan and rotate. Locking bolts slid back. The massive circular door swung open with the sound of hydraulics engaging. "Finally," Julian said, and his voice contained pure exultation. 10 years of playing house for this moment. He pushed the wheelchair into the vault. Inside, there was a single pedestal. On the pedestal sat a laptop and a glass vial. Nothing else. No stacks of money, no jewels, no gold bars. Just those 2 objects, sitting in the center of an enormous empty space that echoed with emptiness. Julian rushed to the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the laptop. Behind him, Thorn stepped into the vault as well, her hand hidden in her coat pocket. Elena watched from the wheelchair, her body too damaged to move, her mind trying to make sense of the betrayal that was about to happen. Thorn pulled a medical syringe from her pocket. The barrel was filled with clear liquid. As Julian leaned over the laptop, opening it to examine its contents, Thorn drove the needle into his neck with a precision that suggested she'd done this before. "Julian, you were always just the muscle," Thorn said, her voice devoid of any inflection whatsoever. "I never intended to share." Julian gasped. His hands flew to his throat. He swung wildly at Thorn, connecting with her jaw, and she staggered back. But the damage had already been done. Whatever was in that syringe was fast-acting. Julian tried to draw his gun, but his fingers were spasming now, losing coordination. The gun fell to the floor and then slid across the polished concrete toward Elena's wheelchair. Elena, still bound at the wrists to the wheelchair's armrests, tried to reach the gun with her feet. She kicked out, trying to move it closer. but Thorn recovered from the blow to her jaw and lunged toward Elena instead. Thorn's boot came down hard on Elena's wrist, pinning it to the wheelchair arm. Elena heard the crack of small bones breaking. The pain was extraordinary. Thorn leaned over Elena, her face inches away. She pulled out a surgical scalpel from another pocket, the blade glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Now, Elena, I need your eyes one more time to authorize the transfer. Then you're redundant, just like Julian." But Elena wasn't looking at Thorn. She was looking past her at the laptop screen. And what she saw there made everything else seem simultaneously more important and entirely irrelevant. The laptop wasn't displaying a bank interface. It was displaying a countdown timer. Red numbers against a black background. 72 seconds remaining. And beneath the numbers, in stark white text, "Aethelgard Purge Protocol active." "He didn't leave me money," Elena said. And she found herself laughing, a hollow, broken sound. "He left me a bomb for the people who took him." Thorn spun around to the laptop. Her hands moved to the keyboard, fingers flying across the keys in a desperate attempt to bypass the system. But the screen flashed, and a new message appeared. "Biometric discrepancy detected. Purge accelerated." The timer jumped from 72 seconds to 30. Thorn began to scream. She ran to the vault door, trying to pry it open manually, but the locking bolts had engaged again. The door wasn't going to open. Not from inside. Not before the timer reached 0. Elena looked at Julian's body. His eyes were already glazing over. In his lifeless hand, he still held the vault key. And now that Elena looked at it more carefully, she could see something she'd missed before. A small button, recessed, hidden, waiting to be pressed. Elena used her teeth to grab the key from Julian's hand. She pulled it back into her lap and pressed her thumb against the small button. It clicked. A small blue LED on the keyhead lit up. The wheelchair's arm had a hidden compartment. She knew because her father had told her about it years ago, in one of his last conversations with her before he disappeared. "If you ever need to get away," he'd said, "I'll leave something in a safe place. A ceramic blade. You'll know where to look." The compartment on the wheelchair's arm popped open. Inside was a sharp ceramic blade, designed not to show up on metal detectors. Elena used it to slice through her zip ties. The plastic fell away. Blood dripped from her wrists. The timer hit 5 seconds. Elena sprinted out of the vault into the foyer. She hit the emergency override on the outer wall, and a thick blast shield began to slide down between her and the vault. She could see Thorn's face through the narrowing gap, reaching out, her mouth open in a final scream. "The trust ends here," Elena said, flat and final. The blast shield sealed completely. Behind it, the sound of the Purge Protocol activating. Not an explosion, but something worse. The sound of chemical warfare being unleashed in an enclosed space. The sound of a system designed to erase evidence and eliminate witnesses. The blast shield was thick enough to muffle most of the sound. Elena didn't stop to listen. She moved deeper into the facility, following the emergency exit signs that glowed green in the dim hallway. Behind her, a muffled sound echoed through the concrete. Something between a boom and a whump. She reached the parking garage at 4:45. Behind her, the underground levels were being chemically neutralized. Green gas began to vent from the elevator shafts, billowing up into the garage in thick, toxic clouds. The smell was chemical and wrong. The kind of smell that meant death was being systematized and processed according to protocol. Julian's black sedan was in the garage. Elena used the key as a fob. The doors unlocked. She slid into the driver's seat and hit the start button. The engine roared to life, and the dashboard illuminated, casting Elena's battered face in the glow of warning lights. She floored the accelerator. The tires screamed against the concrete. She burst through the exit gate, the wooden arms shattering as she hit it at speed. She swerved into evening traffic, the sedan responding to her inputs with precision and power. She drove without a destination. The city passed by in a blur of lights and motion. For the first time in what felt like years, but was actually only hours, Elena breathed air that wasn't laden with threat or chemical weapons or betrayal. As the sun began to descend toward the horizon, Elena found herself driving toward the coast. There was an overlook she'd been to once, years ago, before she'd met Julian. A place where the cliff edge looked out over the Pacific Ocean and the sky turned orange and purple in the final moments before darkness. She pulled the car over near that edge. The engine ticked as it cooled. The waves crashed against the rocks far below. Elena turned on the center console screen, and a hidden file appeared on the touch screen. The file was labeled in her father's handwriting, scanned and digitized. "For my daughter." She pressed play. Her father's voice filled the sedan. It was older than she remembered it. Thinner, as though illness had worn away at his vocal cords. But unmistakably, his voice. "Elena, if you're hearing this from Julian's car, then Julian is dead. And so is Eris Thorne. I knew they would find you. I needed them to, so I could end them through you. They were always going to come for what I left behind. But I needed someone who was intelligent enough to survive the experience. Someone smart enough to understand that compliance was surrender. You proved to be more resourceful than I dared hope." The voice paused. In the background of the recording, Elena could hear the sound of waves. Her father had made this recording somewhere by the ocean, just as she was listening to it now. "The vault contains what remains of my liquidated assets," the voice continued. "But I spent most of it on the trap. The Purge Protocol, the dual auth system, everything designed to ensure that if Aethelgard ever came for you, they would end themselves in the process of trying to access what they thought you were guarding. You're not guarding money, Elena. You were guarding a device." The laptop screen on the center console switched views. A bank account, Elena's name, a balance of $12,500. Beneath it, a final message from her father's recorded voice. "The rest was spent on the trap, Elena. You're broke, but you're clean. No records, no Aethelgard. Go live." The recording ended. Elena sat in the sedan as the sun finished its descent. The sky turned darker shades of purple and blue. The stars began to appear, first as single pinpricks and then as constellations. She pulled the brass key from the center console, where she'd set it after the escape. She looked at it for a long moment. It had served its purpose. It was finished now. She rolled down the window and threw the key out into the abyss. It fell toward the rocks below, disappearing into the darkness and the sound of crashing waves. Elena put the car in gear. She drove away from the overlook, leaving the coast behind. She didn't have a destination. She didn't have a plan. She had $2,000 and a completely clean identity in a world that suddenly seemed both terrifyingly vast and suddenly navigable. Behind her, the ocean continued its eternal work of breaking itself against the rocks. Somewhere in the city she'd left, emergency crews were probably finding their way into the sealed vault. They'd find bodies. They'd find evidence of a purge protocol. They'd find nothing that connected to Elena Vance, because her father had spent the last decade of his life ensuring that everything that could connect her to Julian and Thorne and Aethelgard had been systematically destroyed. She'd been a weapon, a delivery mechanism, a trap disguised as a person. And now that the trap had been sprung and everything it was designed to destroy had been destroyed, she was simply Elena again. The road stretched out in front of her, illuminated by headlights and the faint glow of a city at night. She was the only one left. The only one who had survived the extraction that had never been designed to extract anything except revenge.